Okay, we are recording. Okay, welcome everybody again, and welcome to Goldfinches and Great Horns, Maryland native birds of spring. We are very happy to have both the Salisbury Zoo and the Ward Museum with us today. We are going to start out with the zoo, so I am just going to turn it over to them. So Kirby, take it away. Thank you.
All right, will do. I'd like to point out the first thing. I'm sorry, yes?
No, I just say one other thing. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and I will ask at the end of each segment. So after the zoo's done, I'll ask, and then after the Ward Museum's done, I'll ask. Sorry about that.
No worries, no.
Thank you.
All right, so to start off here, I want to just point out, yes, it does say my name is Mary Seaman. It is because we had to split up our accounts to log in. I didn't want to kick the other guys off. So my name is Kirby Brown, and I'm the education technician here at the Salisbury Zoo. And what I'm going to be doing for the first part of our panel of our program is I'm going to introduce you guys to two local species. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the adaptation that these guys have. They're both raptors, by the way. That's going to be the primary focus of my half. Is we're really going to talk about, again, the predator species that are local species here in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And again, talking about the adaptations they have that really help them in the springtime. All right, so I'm going to be periodically stepping away to get one of these guys, and I'll bring him back over to the camera. Also, I apologize for the lighting. When I'm back here, the lighting's better, but when I'm closer to the screen, it kind of gives me a halo. But with that, I'm going to step away real quick and bring over our first animal ambassador, and that is going to be our great horned owl. So if you give me just one moment, I'll be right back. There you go. So this is Renfield. Renfield, she is a great horned owl, and she's probably going to stare at me for this, but Renfield, she is one of our animal ambassadors, which means she's a part of our collection where she has come to us due to either being unable to survive in the wild due to being born in human care and being raised in human care, or they have some sort of injury that prevents them from surviving well in the wild. So in Renfield's case here, she was unfortunately struck by a car. And so she actually had to undergo surgery to one of her eyes. But as a result, her depth perception, her eyesight's not as well as it could be. And so Renfield is helping us out today by showing off some adaptations, and also going to probably stare at me the entire time. Hopefully she will look over at the camera. There she goes. She's starting to. But talking about springtime animals, and these guys in particular, around this time of year, you're going to start seeing great horned owls fledging. All right, they're going to be, when fledging, by the way, is when they are starting to gather strength in their wings. All right, it's also known as branching. When they are starting, again, gather strength in their wings, they're starting to learn how to fly on their own. They're starting to leave the nest. And one adaptation that these great horned owls have, if she will be so kind, is you may note, of course, she's kind of sitting down on them, she has very feathered toes. Her feet are covered in feathers. And that's an indication of when a raptor actually will nest and lay their eggs. If their feet tend to be more covered in feathers, that means that their feet are going to actually be a little bit warmer. And that can indicate to you that they are usually breeding and constructing nests and laying their eggs in the winter, because warmer feet covered in feathers means that they can incubate their eggs, they can sit on their eggs and keep them even more warm. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. Of course, the bald eagles, they're going to be probably nesting in colder months, but these guys, they're doing it in the dead of winter. So their young, their hatchlings are coming out around this time. Now, a few other quick adaptations. She's going to be giving me a little bit of grief. Of course, you can see those very big eyes there. And those big eyes, I always like to point out, the great adaptations with those big eyes there is the ability to take in a lot of light. Here, I'm going to try to crouch down a little bit, and so maybe she'll focus on the screen. There we go. All right, so those big eyes, the ability to open those pupils as wide as possible is what really helps these guys in seeing at night, and especially in the winter as well. Winter, it's going to be shorter days, longer nights. So they're going to be actually a lot more active in winter than they would be throughout the other times of the year, because again, the nights are going to be longer with these guys being nocturnal. And also a lot of their other adaptations help them survive even better in the winter, I would say. So that big eyesight, taking in as much, or big pupils, taking in as much light as possible throughout the winter months, but also their hearing. She's gonna help me out. Come on, let's turn back over this way. I might have to turn her a little. You may notice that she has these facial discs around her eyes there. So those are very similar to human pinna, which are what most people call our ears. Technically, what are our ears are located inside of our heads, the eardrum, all the organs there that connect and conduct sound to our brain, or rather the signals sound creates to our brain. Instead of having external ears like that, or pinna, she has those facial discs. Now, another thing that she has is she actually has one ear located up high, one down low. You might be able to see on this side, there's sort of a little break in her facial disc there. That break is the location of one of her ears, and if she is so kind as to turn her head, her other one is located a little bit higher up than that one. And that adaptation helps them they actually add a third dimension to their hearing. You see, with other animals, ourselves included, with our ears being located on basically the same level, our directional hearing is kind of limited to left and right. Yeah, we can somewhat make out sounds if they're above us or below us, but not as much as these guys, with having that uneven ear placement, or unlevel. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. And so where that comes into play in springtime is that these guys throughout the winter, they have been bulking up, and in hunting in winter, that hearing can actually assist them because they can actually hear through layers of snow with their very sensitive hearing. You've probably seen videos of owls just hanging out on fence posts and trees, and they will suddenly dive into the snow to capture mice, rats, what have you. And that is due in part to their impressive hearing. All right, and so in the springtime, as these guys are coming out, their hearing is really kind of dialed up to 11 because everything is starting to come out. Everything is becoming more active. Let's see if she'll come back over to the screen there. Now, around this time of year, with their young going out and gathering strength, they will be hunting on their own as well. And so all those other, the hearing, the sight, those adaptations are going to be helping them to, again, bulk up as they're, growing up effectively. So these guys, they reach maturity within the year. So hatching in winter, growing up in spring, and then reaching maturity within the year. So having those adaptations there is going to really help them, especially in that first push in the spring. Now, a few other things about these guys. You may notice her coloration. Yes, I know. I'm going to try to turn her, but you may notice her feather patterns, all right, are like interesting shades of brown and red. And one thing that gives these guys, especially here on the Eastern Shore, is a very good camouflage, especially amongst pine trees. All right, so amongst the pines, think of the coloration of pine bark, think of the coloration of pine needles, and you can really see how that feather coloration is going to help these guys blend into their environment. And of course, coming into spring, all right, the pine trees around here, a lot of them are going to start shedding a lot of their needles. Again, they're going to start pollen production. All right, so they might rejuvenate their needles. All right, so you're going to see a lot of pine trees that suddenly kind of turn a brownish color right before spring really sets in. Again, that's another unique adaptation. Their camouflage is going to help them excel at that time because they're really going to be blending into especially that brownish pine needle and pine bark and pine needle background. All right, so I always like to point that out because it's kind of interesting how the environment here on the Eastern Shore is almost, it's helping these guys in so many different ways, but it's also these guys' adaptations as well. Now, to step away from a few adaptations, not so much associated with spring, you may have noticed when she was hooting earlier, and now she's showing it off, she has a little white patch underneath her chin. That white patch is actually something she will show off to I almost call it like the hazard lights on the owl. She'll start flashing that when maybe, she's getting a little grumpy. If she were to maintain it, that is a signal to me that, okay, she's starting to show off. Maybe I need to back off a little bit and give her some space. But that is something that they will flash not only to other owls, but they'll sometimes flash it to other animals. But that is really an adaptation that is suited towards the expression to other owls. And speaking of expression with other owls, I'm going to step in and point out on top of her head, and then see if she'll try to jump onto the camera. She has on top of her head what most people refer to as ear tufts. Those are also known as plumicorns. And those ear tufts on top of her head, they are also for expression. She will show those, and she'll actually raise those up to express just kind of a general sign of contentment. However, as you notice now she's indicating to me that it might be time for her to go back in. She's laying those flat. She's flashing her white patch. I think she's getting a little tired of being out on display here. But I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to see those. And again, these guys, they do have methods of expressing themselves, not only to other animals, but to other great horned owls as well. Well, with that, as you can see, she's saying, all right, it's time for me to go back. I'm going to set her back in. So if you give me just a moment. Pass that up. All right. And perch. There you go. So a few other adaptations of these great horned owls I wanted to point out. Of course, they have their silent flight, and that is going to help them, especially in the winter months leading up to the spring, especially as spring, because it's very quiet. There's not a lot of activity, and they're going to need to be very quiet in order to hunt. And again, these adaptations with hunting in the winter, that is helping them be they're getting a jump start on the spring. So when springtime comes around, you're going to probably hear these guys communicating to each other, moving around a lot more, because they've effectively gotten a jump start versus all the other raptor species, our eagles, our hawks, what have you. And so that's why I wanted to show off Renfield, our great horned owl. Now I'm going to be showing off and introducing an animal ambassador that a lot of you guys are probably familiar with for unfortunate reasons. They are well known because we have a lot of chicken farms here in our area. And these guys tend to be a problem for a lot of our chicken farmers. Our next animal ambassador, her name is Mina, and she is a red-tailed hawk. So I'm going to bring her on out. Give me just a moment. Sorry about that. She got a little bit of newspaper caught on her talon and she didn't want to take it with her. So this is Mina. Mina is a red-tailed hawk, and fortunately what you could probably notice right off the bat is her specific injury, again, most likely due to a car strike, was that she lost use of her eye and it did have to be amputated. But Mina is a great example of a springtime bird because these guys, they are starting to pair off in the spring. And so one thing you may notice in contrast to the great horned owl is that her feet do not have feathers all over them. They come down to, just mid-ankle, but her feet are bare. And so having those bare feet is, again, an indication that these guys are going to be pairing off. They're going to be courting and probably nesting in the summer, because they don't have to have very warm feet to incubate their young. Right? They don't have to worry about a limited blood supply in their feet. So these guys, they're pairing up, they're courting in the spring. So you're probably going to be seeing these guys a lot more. One thing you see these guys will do during that springtime is, courting and, showing off to other mates. It takes a lot of energy. So you're going to see these guys quite a bit more compared to in winter, obviously. These guys, they are raptors, so they're going to be hunting mice and rats and a lot of rodents. They'll also go after things like snakes. And one thing is that all of these species are starting to become a lot more active in the spring. And so again, compared to the great horned owl, these guys, they are waking up in the springtime. Throughout the winter months, they'll be a little bit less active. There are some species that are active throughout the winter. So things like squirrels, maybe a little bit more active in the winter, a lot of rodents and things. But these guys, they're going to be going kind of a period of dormancy during the winter. So when springtime comes, food becomes a lot more plentiful. They are going to ramp up their hunting. Yep, you want to get readjusted? There you go. Here, I'm actually going to stand up. I think she's not a fan of being so low to the ground. So, a few quick things about the red-tailed hawk is obviously the red tail. All right. And I always like to point that out because we do have a cousin of the red-tailed hawk, and that is the red-shouldered hawk. And so if you want to tell the difference at a distance, if you're able to see that tail, if the tail is red, obviously a red-tailed hawk. The tail has a bar pattern on it. That is going to be the red-shouldered hawk. There you go. All right. A few other things. You notice that the underside of her wings, all right, are very light in color, whereas the backside of her wings, very dark in color. That's an example of what's known as counter shading, which is an adaptation, a method of camouflage that's not unique to birds. There are a lot of different animals that have this counter shading, many fish species. There are actually a lot of turtle species, aquatic turtle species that have this. But in her case, the method of camouflage is that when she is viewed from underneath, she kind of blends into the sky because it's a lighter coloration, all right, when being viewed from over or underneath. However, if she were to be viewed from overhead, let's say by a larger hawk, maybe something like a bald eagle, with her darker coloration, she is going to be blending in to the ground underneath of her. So that adaptation there is both helping for her to hunt her prey, but also to hide from competition. These guys, even though she is quite large and that wingspan that she has, it extends to 6 feet, they still have very tough competition from other raptors right off the bat, bald eagles, especially here on the Houston shore. Bald eagles, unfortunately, I know they are very symbolic, but they do kind of go after other raptors who are hunting in their areas. And sometimes bald eagles will go after red-tailed hawks who have secured some prey and either chasing them away from the territory or trying to steal the prey away from them. So these hawks, they have to have those adaptations. They have to have the ability to not only be hidden from their prey, but also to be hidden from any other animal that might want to take that prey away from them. So one adaptation I always like to show off as well is those talons. I'll bring her in close there. All right, she has the very sharp curved talons that raptors are really well known for. In this case, have a very strong grip. And so with other animals having claws, say like a bear, cat, what have you, they're really scratching, cutting with those claws. But the talons there, they're doing gripping versus cutting. So that's the distinction I always like to point out with the difference between claws and talons. She's kind of spreading her wings. Might need to get a little bit adjusted. There you go. And also you may notice her curved beak. And one adaptation there between the two is that she can actually interact the curved beak and her curved talon almost like a pair of scissors when she's cutting up and tearing her prey into smaller pieces. All right. Then one more adaptation I want to point out is you may notice the edges of her wings, the feathers, the primary feathers there, are kind of separated. And that is actually something that will help her sustain flight, especially when soaring high up in the air, especially when soaring on thermals. Again, in springtime, things are heating up, and so you're starting to get a lot more thermals being generated. For those of you who didn't know, a thermal is a column of hot air. It's rising up from the ground and rising up into the air. And as it does, it encounters cooler, cross breezes, and that causes that column of hot air to start spinning. Well, these guys will go ahead and ride those thermals just like turkey vultures will ride those thermals. But those extended and kind of separated primary feathers way out there, they are able to assist with the soaring because it's almost as though they have several additional smaller wings on the edges of their larger wings. And so the edges of their wings, they're actually generating a little bit more lift on the edges by having those separated out primaries. And so as a result, these guys are very good at soaring. Now, when you see these guys at a distance and they are soaring, if you want to easily tell the difference between them and a turkey vulture, as she's helping me demonstrate, if they occasionally flap, that's the giveaway that that's not a turkey vulture. Bald eagles, red-tailed hawks, they will occasionally have to flap their wings in order to sustain that flight. Turkey vultures, their separated primary feathers are in such a way where they can really maintain that soaring pattern. These guys will occasionally have to flap their wings in order to stay up in the air. All right. Now, her eyesight, if she'll let me zoom in close, she's not a fan of being real close to the ground. Again, her eyesight, all right, is still very good. Her eyes, not as large as the great horned owls, but it is still very good. And that, one thing that's indicative there, or rather what indicates that, is the relativity of the size of her eyes to the size of her head. If she will be so kind to bring her up close. You notice her head, relative to her size, all right, her eyes are very large in her skull. And so that's one giveaway as the eyesight of these guys. Now, color vision, not so great, but detail vision is exceptionally sharp. And that's how these guys are hunting. They are looking down at the ground and they are watching for movement. And they will track that movement. And once they establish that whatever's moving down there is probably a prey item, they begin their dive. These guys, they do dive and they will swoop in. And as they swoop in, they'll open up their wings very wide, almost like a parachute, and swing their talons forward to catch their prey in a dive. Well, one thing that assists them with that dive, if she will sometimes assist me, is that head stabilization. I'll see if I can get her to be still. And if I just very gently rock her, you notice that her head kind of maintains a position. Let's see if I can bring her in close and do the same. You can see that very slight head stabilization. And that assists them in that dive because they're flying at high speeds, not diving in at high speeds as high as, say, a peregrine falcon. These guys, their max speed, it can breach over 100 miles per hour. Again, not as fast as, say, peregrine falcons can. But that head stabilization means that she can keep her focus on her prey item and then not lose track of it during this high velocity dive. Unfortunately, that also translates into she's going to be focused in on her prey exclusively. She's not going to be noticing anything going on in her periphery, which in her case is fortunately the leading cause of car strikes for the red-tailed hawk. They're focused in, they're zeroed in on their prey. They don't see the car coming in the opposite direction, or I'm sorry, the perpendicular direction to them, and they get struck by a car. So that is most likely a scenario that played out for her car strike. There aren't a lot of reasons why a hawk would be hanging out near a roadway unless they were hanging out on, say, a tree line or a power line looking for prey. They swept in, or swooped in rather, and did not see the car coming in the other direction there. But I'm going to bring her in real close. to show off that beak. So you guys, I think she's calmed down a little bit so you can see that beak a little bit better. All right, and I'll bring her back over. And of course, one last adaptation. Thank you very much. One last adaptation that these guys have is their ability to puff up their feathers. She's not doing it right now, but she can actually puff herself up. And that helps her out in the springtime because what she can do is she can actually cool herself down by opening up her feathers and allowing air to flow through in the spaces between her feathers. These guys, they overheat very easily. And so, especially when they're moving around quite a bit. So they need a good way to cool down. But unfortunately, these guys, they do not sweat. And they do pant. She's actually starting to pant a little bit right now, but that's because she's telling me she's tired of this already. But these guys, one method of cooling themselves down is to, again, puff up and open up their feathers and allow that air to flow through their feathers. So again, a few quick adaptations about 2 springtime raptor species you're going to be seeing, all right, a little bit more active around this time of year. I'm going to switch it on over and to the Ward Museum. Hope you guys learned a little bit something about one of our local raptor species. I'll be right back.
Thank you, Kirby. I have one question for you when you get a sec.
All right, I'll be right back. Just going to let you go on back in.
And the zoo is open on weekends, everyone, Friday through Sunday, open in the morning and the afternoon. Highly encourage taking a walk around there. Very peaceful. The question's from Rachel, and she says, how is Theodore?
Theodore, yeah, for those of you who don't know, Theodore, our crow, he is doing quite well. He has become a little bit less loquacious since we haven't had a steady, crowd moving through. We've noticed that he has started to make less of the human mimicry. So at one point he was saying, hi, hello, hey there. And one additional call he would do is he would actually do the impersonation of a human doing an impersonation of a crow. So instead of cawing, he would mimic the word caw. He has started to mimic a lot more of the local songbirds. So that's what's been kind of, keeping him entertained throughout, our closed periods, is he's now getting a little bit more in touch with the other local species other than all the people walking through. But occasionally I'll be walking through and he'll still say hello. And when you're, just kind of walking along and there's no one around you, it is still a little bit jarring, but he is still doing very well.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? We can always circle back. Okay, so thank you, Salisbury Zoo and Kirby. We really appreciate it. I'm going to switch out the pins here. And Miss Gina, you're in the hot seat now. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Gina Vieira, and I am the interdepartmental program coordinator at the Ward Museum, and the lovely lady up next to me is Brenda Miller, my coworker at the zoo, our education coordinator. So I am actually going to start by sharing my screen so we can talk about migration. All right. So where the zoo focused mostly on raptors, we're going to talk about some songbirds and waterfowl. So migration is defined as a seasonal movement of a group of animals from one area to another. It has no set distance or scale. It kind of depends on the species. And we actually have through eBird 2 migration maps that we are going to look at really fast. So true to the name of the program, we're going to look at the goldfinch, which is kind of a local migration. And the darker the color, the more abundant the bird is. And you can kind of see if you look in our area, they don't really leave us. So a lot of people seem to think that the appearance of goldfinches kind of show that spring is here, but really it's just their plumage is changing. They've been here all along. And then a longer distance migration is the barn swallow. So we get a lot of those here at the museum. There's a bridge behind the museum and they will build their nests underneath that bridge. So when they're up here in that season, they will be everywhere around us. So you can see that they go a much further distance. They go into South America, and they're almost entirely out of the United States at one point. All right. So there's two major migration seasons, which is the spring, which is traveling from wintering grounds to breeding grounds. And then in the fall, they're doing the opposite and traveling from breeding to wintering grounds. The reason why birds migrate, and not every bird migrates, more resources are going to be available in warmer areas. There's going to be more space. The climate is going to be better suited to them. They may be following a food source that also migrates, because not just birds migrate. And there's safer conditions for raising their young. Now, there's challenges to migration. It's a high energy cost. It's a lot of flying. It's a lot of not stopping. And then there's also the possibility of maybe there's been development and someplace that they were able to stop and rest no longer exists. They have to build up a lot of fat reserves in order to keep flying for those long periods of time. They might get lost. And if they're starting to get tired or they're getting weak, it's a lot easier for predators to pick them off. It's a very higher risk of mortality to migrate than to not migrate. So their strategies for migrating are stopover sites, which is, places that they feel is safe. Shoemaker Pond outside of the Ward Museum, we get a lot of migration. We're part of the Atlantic Flyway, the whole Delmarva Peninsula is, and we get a ton of migratory birds in our area for both spring and fall migration. The major routes tend to avoid obstacles such as mountain ranges and oceans, and you can kind of see sort of on this map here the different flyways. I think that our faces are over here, so you kind of can't see it on mine. But all the black dots are the Atlantic Flyway, so you can kind of see where it comes here, and then right here is where we are, and then it heads down towards this way. So in our area specifically, we will get over 10 million migratory songbirds, different species, and about 20 to 80,000 migratory raptors. We have a variety of habitats in this area and a lot of food sources. And since we have such a flat and open landscape, it's really useful for them because they're not having to avoid a lot of obstacles. And then where I said they avoid oceans, we're a long bottleneck of land with the bay on one side and the ocean on the other. So they end up just flying through Delmarva, and that's why we get so many. So birds that winter in Delmarva will leave to breed elsewhere during the spring, and then we get some waterfowl that do that, some finches, and I will have some examples with some of our artwork. And then there's birds that pass through Delmarva on their way to better breeding grounds. That's where a lot of our warblers come from. We get flycatchers, thrushes, and shorebirds. We don't get shorebirds on Shoemaker Pond. Obviously, they're towards the shore. There's a lot of shorebirding in Ocean City during migratory season. And then we get birds that arrive from their wintering grounds to breed here. That's going to be swallows, some other variations of warblers, other variations of flycatchers, and tangers. There are birds that remain here year round, but will make small migrations or display other changes. And then there are birds that used to migrate that just live here now, like Canada geese. You'll notice that we'll get a lot more of them during migratory season, but they're here year round. All right, so we're going to look at some examples. We don't need to share screen anymore. Okay, so we are going to look at the first one, which is a hooded merganser. And this is the decoy that I have for that. And it was carved by Grant Goltz. And this is a diving duck, which means that its legs are going to be further back. So if you ever see a duck that looks like it doesn't really belong walking on land, that's going to be a diving duck because of where its legs are situated. So they're notable for their hood. So they have this very weird feather crest that comes out the back, and it has a white patch in males. So since it's a diving duck, unlike a lot of ducks, you can see it on the decoy, but it's going to be really hard to see it on the camera. But they have a serrated bill, and you can kind of see this little hook right here at the tip of it. And that's because they feed mostly on aquatic animals. So since they dive under, they're going to be hunting for like the shrimps and like some of the stuff that they can find underwater, as opposed to just eating the vegetation on the top. They leave this area for breeding grounds around March and April. So they're found in wetlands, estuaries, and bodies of fresh water. They nest in tree cavities, and they've been spotted this month. Brenda actually went and looked on eBird to try and see when these birds were last spotted. So they were seen this month at Blackwater, Chincoteague, around Ocean City, and we get them on Shoemaker Pond. So that's that guy.
They're generally, just to jump in, they're generally a duck that is typically found more in freshwater areas. Can be found on saltwater as well. So keep an eye out throughout Del Mar, not just on the coastlines. They'll be in the freshwater areas too.
So the next one we're going to look at is a yellow legs. And this guy is a little much. So I'm going to try and turn this so that we can see the bird the best. So there are greater yellow legs and lesser yellow legs, and this guy is a lesser yellow leg. The greater yellow legs, their beaks are a lot longer and a little thicker. So since this guy is pretty proportionate to his head and his beak is pretty thin, he's a lesser yellow legs. You can see that they have like this speckled brown, gray, and white plumage. It lets them fit in really well at the shoreline. Since we sit on the edge of their wintering and migration ranges, they can potentially be seen in the winter as well as during early spring, and they'll leave around late May. So these guys are primarily found in wetlands, mudflats, lake edges, sometimes flooded agricultural fields, because they're going to be looking for water sources for the most part. They nest on the ground instead of like our hooded mergansers are nesting in trees. They build nests on the ground. And they've been spotted this month also at Blackwater and Chincoteague, along with Taylor Landing and other coastal areas. Like I said, we don't really get shorebirds at Shoemaker Pond because they're not looking for a pond, they're looking for shoreline. But you can kind of see he's a little wavery, so I don't like holding him super long, but you can see his long yellow legs, which give him his name. Thank you. All right. So we looked at our duck and we looked at our shorebirds, and now we're going to look at a warbler. Warblers are very tiny and very bright and very easy to miss. So this is a Profonitary Warbler. And you can see how small these guys are. So this is a songbird that journeys from Central and South America to breed here. So they come here for breeding. They'll breed in forests near lakes and streams and wooded swamps. So they're looking for very dense vegetation to kind of hide in. These guys will also nest in tree cavities, and the best place to find them is the Maryland Trail of Change at Shad Landing in Pocomoke State Park. We do have across the street from us Beaver Dam Creek, and we have seen a couple of these there. But I think it's only happened like once or twice that we've been over there. So these guys can be confused with the goldfinch, and they're different in they look the same when they're flying around in front of you very fast that it can be easy to mistake them, but they have a skinnier beak and a completely yellow head and gray wings, whereas the goldfinch has different plumages for breeding and wintering, which, like I said, some people think that they leave and then they come back, but they're here year round. Their plumage just changes. So their breeding plumage for a goldfinch has a black cap with black and white wings. You can see this guy is just gray, full yellow head. And then their wintering plumage has a pale yellow wash with black and white wings. And see, his wings are gray. Finches tend to hang out in trees, while the Profonitary Warbler will forage in trees and bushes that are lower to the ground. So even the height of where they are in a tree is going to tell you kind of the difference between which one you're looking at. And we saw on that map earlier that they stay in this area, but because their plumage changes, it's really easy to miss them. That one back. Thank you. All right. So one of the most notable birds that we have around here on a constant basis is the red-winged blackbird. They are quite loud and very easy to see because of that. Ooh, he moved. I don't like that. This red bar on their wings. They are a short distance migrant, so they do migrate, but they are found here year round. They are a similar shape to the Baltimore Oriole, but you can see the males are all black with the red and orange bars, and the females, like most bird species, are very dull colors that they can camouflage more easily while they are sitting on a nest. Their spring migration begins in mid-February, and the males will start singing sometime in mid-February. And Brenda, if you want to pull up that call that I'm sure everybody has heard before.
Absolutely.
They'll start singing in mid-February, and that's one of the first signs that spring is coming. Heck here, that's supposed to be in it. There it is. I'm sure that everyone has heard that noise. It is quite loud. So these guys will also, when they migrate, they'll join with other flocks, and it's called a murmuration. So sometimes if you see those big flocks of birds, it could be made of red-winged blackbirds, starlings, other species that are just, safety in numbers kind of thing. They are one of the most common and widespread birds in North America. I'm sure that everyone has seen one at least once. They tend to stay around wetlands, grasslands, and pastures for their potential breeding habitats, which is why they like Shoemaker Pond so much, because we just have a lot of scrub brush around the pond. Their nests are woven grass in low marsh vegetation, and they have been sighted all over Delmarva in this past month. They're seen pretty much year round, basically. Thank you. All right, so birds that winter in Delmarva and leave to breed elsewhere for spring, we get a lot of waterfowl and finches that do that. And the hooded merganser was one example. And then another example is our ringneck duck, which is this guy. And because of the way this decoy is carved, you can't really see its neck, but this way you can kind of see the plumage on it and like the different coloration of its beak. And they do have like a white ring around their neck, and that's usually the easiest way to tell that that's what you're looking at. And then we have birds that pass through Delmarva on their way to other breeding grounds, which is, we get the Blackburnian warbler, we get a chestnut-sided warbler, and we get our yellow legs will do that. Birds that arrive from wintering grounds to breed here are our swallows, our flycatchers, things like that. And our Profonitary Warbler is one of them. Now we have something that we call cheat birds, which are here year round and may migrate short distances, and our red-winged blackbird is one of them. And another really popular example of that is the eastern bluebird. So a lot of people, same thing, they see bluebirds and things like robins, and they think spring is here, they've arrived, but they only short distance migrate, really. They're still here, there's just plumage changes. The goldfinch is the same way, but they are indeed here pretty much year round. And thank you. So we get a lot of different warblers and things like that here, and a really good way to be able to go birding and see these things is to download a bird app and be able to kind of learn from their calls or things like that, because it can be really difficult to see these tiny birds, and usually their calls what's going to give them away. That's all I got.
Gina, do we want to play a song of a Profonitary as an example?
Yeah.
This is that bright yellow warbler that can be mistaken for a goldfinch, but it will sound like this. So yeah, paying attention to that whoop, 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 whoop. Song can be a very nice way to be able to distinguish a lot of those very similar looking birds. Can also be a bit of a challenge to get used to trying to ID something just by ear, but it's a fun challenge to try to use that auditory sense.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these warblers that come through this area look very similar to the Profonitary Warbler because a lot of them are yellow with gray or white or black. And they have very like subtle differentiation between them. So if you see a yellow warbler, zoom by you, it might be that one. It might be a different one. There's so many that have the same kind of coloration.
Yeah, I previously I'd worked at Shad Landing, and we would have visitors who were coming out specifically to photograph the Profonitary warblers, and they would ask me for advice. My advice was always find a cypress and park yourself there and
Hope for the best.
Yeah, because I mean, when they fly, it is just a yellow flash, and you're not even sure it's a Profonitary you're looking at exactly.
Yeah. So. And for the record, additionally, the red-tailed hawk does migrate, but is here year-round, and the great horned owl, for the most part, does not.
Yeah, for usually if it's like way far north populations, they may for the red-tailed hawk, they may short-term or short distance migrate, but for the most part, they're just going to be there year-round.
Yeah, so both of those species are also here year-round.
When I say north, I mean like upper Canada north.
Very north.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was super interesting. I love seeing the red wing blackbirds out on Assateague.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the foliage out there. Like you just catch this little flip of red, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and they're very like bold birds. They like showing off, so it's fun to watch them.
Absolutely, they can be very territorial as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to get into this story, but I learned about birds and territories when I was a kid with a bird. They are mean. They are mean. We do have a question from Jonas. I think this is coming your way, Kirby. Do great horned owls and red-tailed hawks usually have overlapping territories?
They can, because with the red-tailed hawks being a species of raptor that they're ambush predators, they're diving. Their ideal hunting ground is going to be the forest edge, and so here on the eastern shore, unfortunately, you have big open farmland that's going to be full of crops, attracting rodents, and then it's surrounded by these tall stands of pine trees. Yeah, you're going to be getting a lot of red-tailed hawks, and then those pine trees are going to be attracting a lot of great horned owls. Now, there are definitely going to be areas where certain species, of the two, excel better, so they overlap, but there's definitely a disparity between the two. More desert areas, the red-tailed hawk is definitely going to be more represented in more arid scrubland areas. Whereas denser forested areas, you're going to see the great horned owl more represented. But it's not to say that they're completely gone. There's probably pockets here and there that, yeah, you're not going to have one or the other, but those are few and far in between. Their territories do usually tend to overlap because they are more forest edge species, not deep woods or what have you. And great horned owls, they are represented in desert areas, tundra areas, more, I guess, less wooded areas. But once again, the red-tailed hawk is that's their most suitable area of hunting. So to answer your question, there are pockets here and there, but for the most part, yeah, they're going to be overlapping. So I almost sometimes think of the red-tailed hawk and the great horned owl as, the two, like one's the best diurnal raptor, the other is the nocturnal raptor in terms of population. I mean, they're very abundant in terms of raptors. So.
Thank you. If anybody else has any questions, please put it into the Q&A. button. And while we're waiting, I just wanted to note that the Ward Museum is open. I believe it's Wednesday through Sunday, 11 to 4.
Saturday.
But Wednesday through Saturday. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you haven't been, I would encourage you to go. It is absolutely fascinating. Some of the work is just, it's mind blowing. You just can't believe the level of sculpting that goes into the birds, the fat waterfowl. It's absolutely incredible. And they have a gallery of local artists too. So I don't know who's there now. When I was there, it was William Henry, and it was absolutely amazing.
We currently have a gallery of Dr. Joan Gaither's story quilts in that same gallery. And that'll be here through, is it the end of April? The end of April. So you guys got another couple of months to come see that.
Story quilts are really absolutely fascinating.
And these are huge. There's like ones that are like 10 feet tall. They're insane.
I don't have any other questions or comments. Let me just double check. I've not seen anything. Okay, well, everybody get birding.
We do host bird walks at
places.
the Ward Museum Wednesday mornings.
Oh,
at
I'm
9
sorry.
a.m. We do host bird walks at the Ward Museum on Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m.
That's super cool. Yeah, there's a lot of places around here to bird, and there's the zoo. So thank you so much to the Salisbury Zoo, and thank you very much to the Ward Museum. I really appreciate you all being here today, and I'm gonna stop the recording now.